Welcome everyone. This is our last webinar of 2020. Having focused so far on accelerating change, we now switch our attention to portfolio management, and specifically how to gain and maintain control in a time of what has been profound change. For most of us, the change portfolio at the end of 2020 will look significantly different to how it looked in January. The change we've all gone through will rank among the most significant and rapid periods of change we've ever experienced. Some will have fared better than others, of course, but we all have something to learn from each other. The experts willing to share their wisdom with us today are Joe Brace and Rupert Taylor. Rupert has spent 35 years immersed in the leadership of change programs across different sectors and has held a number of executive positions. But the reason we've invited Rupert along today is because he's an evangelist for simplicity. Rupert continually got frustrated at how difficult PPM tools could be to implement and use. So much so that he decided to build his own. When he's not leading that business, he can be found coaching and supporting executives and leaders on the change. So thanks for joining us, Rupert.
Pleasure.
For the last 3 years, Joe has been responsible for a major portfolio of change programs at one of the city's oldest financial establishments, and that's Lloyd's of London. Joe established an incredible, experienced, I should say, an incredible surge in demand for project and program delivery as the organisation built out a transformational strategy, and that required him to ramp up capability extremely quickly and bring structure and governance to the rapidly expanding portfolio. So thanks very much, Joe, for joining us.
Good afternoon.
For those of you that don't know me, and I think there's quite a few on the webinar today, so thanks for joining. My name is David Webb, and I'm one of the directors here at Practicus. I head up the client engagement function and host the odd webinar when I'm not talking to clients about transformation programs. We've got some structured questions lined up, but I'll be asking questions from the audience as we go through as well. So please don't be shy and post your questions via the Q&A function, which you should be able to see on your screen rather than the chat function. So yeah, don't be shy. This is your webinar as much as ours. We're due to run until about 2 o'clock, and we'll be sharing video collateral from this webinar with you all afterwards. If you've got value today from today's conversation, and I sincerely hope that you will, when you receive that email, please could you share it with your community, as the content we hope should be relevant to those with similar challenges. So without further ado, we're going to get started. So the first question that I've got prepared is what impact did the COVID-19 pandemic have on your portfolio, and how did you react to it? So I'm going to go to you, Joe, first.
Yeah, thank you. So obviously COVID had a massive impact across kind of everyone's day-to-day jobs. But I've got to say, in our change portfolio, which is relatively stable, a lot of it multi-year programs, a lot of it with good mature teams leading those functions as well. I've got to say it had minimal impact on us, really. We were already in the working remotely, working across multiple countries, and we were very much in different kind of ways of working and different modes of working. So for us, it really was carry on and get on with it. So we committed straight off the bat to not slowing anything down. We didn't do any major knee-jerk changes to our planning process, and we were asked very, very early by our board and our exec, could we commit to carrying on? Was there anything we needed to immediately triage and stop? And our answer was no. Now, that was for our core portfolio. Many of you also know we're going through a large marketplace transformation as well with the future at Lloyd's. Now, that was a different piece because that was about investing for change and really changing what the market were doing. Now, in that one, we definitely took a pause, and that was sensible because what we didn't want to be doing was putting the market under pressure when we didn't know the impacts on them. So I think it was very easy for us as a core team looking after the established, already running portfolio to crack on. But for the ones that took more of an impact on our customers in an unknown environment, that's where we definitely took a pause and slowed down. So there was two different approaches for us in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And Rupert?
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's really interesting about today and me being on the panel with Joe is that we bring very different perspectives. Joe working for an incredibly well-established organisation that's a genuine sort of British institution. It's fantastic. And what I tend to do is within my businesses, we work with a whole range of different customers of different levels of maturity in different industries, different businesses, etc. So my perspective is probably quite broad. And yeah, what a year this has been. Absolutely extraordinary. And I've been working for nearly 40 years now, and I've never come across anything that came out of the blue like COVID-19 did, that hit us so fast and so hard, and it was so instant, and it was global. It was everywhere. No one could get away from it. Normally, you know, the focus of a crisis is in one part of the market or another part of the market or whatever. This just hit all of us. And so what we saw in terms of the impact of COVID-19 was a massive range. We had some companies that all of a sudden were going to, and I sort of hesitate to say it because it's a bit uncomfortable to say it, but some companies who were instantly going to hugely benefit from this extraordinary situation. So companies in distribution, companies that were very much online driven, and suddenly they had to review their portfolios because they were going to have to scale up massively in the short term in order to meet the demand. I remember actually very early on in those first, I think it was the first week actually, first week or so, I remember having a couple of meetings on Teams. Well, Teams for me was a relatively new platform. I didn't know it that well. We hadn't used it that much. And actually it creaked a little bit in those first couple of weeks. And Microsoft made some amendments and upgraded and changed a few things with their servers, and they sorted it. But they had to very quickly scale up, and there were all sorts of, there were a number of scenarios like that. Of course, for most, that was the exception. For most of our customers, it was a very, very different story, and it was more about rationalizing the portfolio almost overnight, because they had to cut back in order to change essentially their focus. And most of our what that meant was taking fairly instant decisions about what they stop, what they hold, and what they keep going with, and also what they stick sort of into the portfolio, because COVID-19 itself created a whole load of additional projects that needed to hit the portfolio instantly. No time to write a PID, no time to do the program charters and everything that's in the textbook. But, you know, we need everyone working from home from Monday. So laptops and everything else that goes with that, you know, it's huge impact. And the ones, and of course, some of those, our customers have different levels of maturity with regards to both PMOs and project delivery generally. So we saw such a range of impacts, but everyone's sort of forced to take decisions overnight, which I think was a really interesting exercise in reflecting in the mirror and saying, have we allowed our business to be agile enough to support these types of crises, or do we need to become more agile? And I'm saying agile with a small a, clearly, rather than the methodology.
Yeah.
So yeah, massive impacts.
Yeah, just related to that then, Joe, I think you said before when we were preparing for this that maybe the drag factors had changed, or you'd seen a difference there. So I'm not sure if this is the question that would relate to.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of interesting points that Rupert mentioned as well. I mean, we had a team looking at planning for operational resilience. We had a project that was live. The whole point was they were going to be doing work over the year to work out what would happen for something like this. Really interesting. Obviously, overnight, we had to retask them with, stop planning, now start doing. And we had to create ways of getting laptops out to people who weren't in the office. And there was a whole load of work. But what was really nice was having that mature project team that we could retask to it. And we pivoted really quickly to get those guys on the ground. So having some dedicated resource just to focus on COVID was really useful. We obviously had secondments from various other teams across the estate with group technology, data, operations. So getting that group together and having change at the center of it was really powerful. But that drag factor did kick in. Now, for many of you, I mean, I've got kids. I'm sure you have to do homeschooling as well. And we got into a good routine, but it was definitely very, very hard to get into that fact. And I'd say most of our drag factors, most of the inefficiencies, most of our loss of time and productivity can be drawn back to caring of some description, be it for older family, be it for younger kids, be it just for the wider community. And we definitely saw a drag factor of around 10 to 15% in productivity, which was nothing to do with kind of technology, which was nothing to do with what was happening in products and making decisions and projects, but was really related to kind of people's personal pressure. And that's where I think we were in the right place from a maturity. I mean, Rupert, you mentioned about the different types of maturity levels for PMOs. For me, the biggest tipping point between kind of immature and mature is when you can trust and empower your people. And that for me was absolutely fantastic, that we just tipped over that point. Everyone knew that we were looking at deliverables. Everyone knew that we were looking at output, that they weren't being monitored on, well, when are you in the office? So we changed overnight, and almost everyone in the organization to a T put in on their out of office, sorry, not the signature, not even the out of office. They put on their signature, these are my core working hours during the current climate. Please feel free to contact me outside of these. I will endeavor to respond. But I put on mine when I was doing homeschooling. I put on mine when I was doing walks with the kids in the morning. And I would absolutely classify that time, not just in my diary, but in my sign off. And actually that meant that everyone was communicating like that. So you could have a look and you could understand, oh, Bob hasn't responded to me. Well, there's a reason. He's doing homeschooling with his kids at the moment. And it just gave everyone that chance to breathe and ask the question, oh, I see you're not available. I can't find any other time to do a meeting. Would you be available? And the flexibility people showed was astounding. So while we saw a drag factor, it would have been a hell of a lot worse if we didn't have that trust and empowering culture in place at the very, very beginning.
Okay. Rupert.
David, thank you. Just one more to add to that, because it was such an intense period that I think it deserves an extra couple of minutes.
Okay. We've got a couple of minutes, that's fine.
So one of the things that I remember about two or 3 weeks in, maybe 4 weeks into the pandemic, I remember sort of looking again across the experiences that we were going through with our customers and how they were responding, how they were reacting. There were two things that really stick out in my mind that I think are interesting. The first is many of the executive teams that are essentially sponsoring portfolios within our customers, there's day-to-day conflicts, there's politics, there's issues, there always is between, who's going to get what priorities on the portfolio, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. That just seemed to go out of the window. And pretty much universally, executive teams came together. And I think this is something that a crisis often does. It pulls those people together and you have, you're in this together. It's a very bonding experience. And you have to take decisions in the interest of the organization, not necessarily in the interest of your function. And I think it was a very bonding experience for a lot of the executive teams that I've seen over previous years struggling to collaborate effectively. And the other thing that I found amazing, I work quite closely with a couple of universities, and one of the things that the universities were really desperately worried about was they were very worried, obviously, about the student numbers that were going to come sort of in post-COVID or during the COVID situation. And they were very worried about the student experience, everything having to go online like we were in the business world, and tutorials and the academic agenda going predominantly or significantly online. And what's been interesting has been, universities have been forced into this new way of working. And again, they're quite traditional sort of organizations that have got embedded cultures and embedded ways of doing things that take years to change sometimes. They were forced to change overnight. They had to, and they had to get their students essentially working with lectures online. What's fascinating to me is here we are 8 months later, and all universities have something called the NSS score, which is a rating of satisfaction, student satisfaction against the various different levers that or activities that they have. And in many cases, the NSS score has gone up significantly, not gone down, because people have communicated with students. They have, it's just fascinating, the dynamics that I think COVID-19 has generated around portfolios of projects.
I didn't know that. Very interesting. Thank you. So now we've we've dealt with, well, we started with COVID. If we move back towards our sort of topic more in general, the next question is, how important is the relationship between the portfolio office and the board or the exec, and how should it be developed? So I'm going to start with you, Rupert, on that one.
So I think it's crucial. Has there ever been a more sort of prominent time to have a good relationship with your board than the last 8 months? I think the key thing for me in terms of how it should be developed is, for those that are on this webinar that are involved in portfolio offices or PMOs or project management, project delivery or whatever, is asking the question, how do we get away from being considered as an administrative reporting function, and how do we actually shift that into a world of generating value? And I think the key bridge there is that executive team, that board. You've got to have a relationship with the board that enables you to manage your portfolio, balance your portfolio, optimize your portfolio using their leadership and their decision making and their collaboration. And I think we as a profession need to be stronger about what we demand in that space. We've got to be better about going to the top level of the organization and saying, our purpose as a function is to support optimization of the portfolio. If we're going to do that, we have got to have you on board as an executive team, and we need to have your leadership in order to take the right decisions at the right times to do the right projects and programs in the right way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what do you think?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more, Rupert. I mean, and that trust, which is only gained by delivery. Let's face it, that they trust the people that deliver for them, and that's your currency in the change world and the PMO world. When you deliver and you fulfill promises, that's what gives you kind of the ticket to the next game. And that trust factor really does show itself at times like COVID, when everyone looked at the portfolio and went, right, triage, what do we need to stop? But they didn't look at it and say, we'll tell you what we think we should stop. It was, what do we need to stop? Where are we committed? Where are we going to hurt ourselves by slowing down? Regulators weren't pushing out many timeframes, so why would we? You know, we had a number of things that we had to react to. And I think getting to that kind of trusted advisor place, or at least the adult in the room conversation, where you can say, hang on, we can't just stop things at the drop of a hat. There is an embedded cost to this, or a committed cost. Having those conversations was really useful. Prepping up for the meetings in advance and knowing which things can we slow down without impact, which things have big impact, and providing those different lenses. And I think, I know, Rupert, you're heavily involved with the software side of things. How many times do we get asked to produce a different report with a slightly different tweak on the same set of data? And there's a reason. That's how we think through it as kind of humans. And the bit that people are looking for is our opinion and our confidence. When somebody asks you a question and says, right, are we okay? The more you kind of go, not sure, I'll come back to you, the more kind of fear you actually put in there. You shouldn't just jump to an answer, but actually knowing your data, knowing your portfolio, knowing the state you're in, and being able to provide that immediate answer of, actually, I think we're okay, I'll come back and confirm, and then digging into the data to support that. That is immensely powerful. And we had a really vocal support in terms of our COO at the board, who would very much take it forward as, this is what we need to get done. And our CFO was actually quite reasonable as well, which is unheard of for CFOs. But actually, they understood that there was going to be a big cost to this, and that actually it wasn't a great cost-saving exercise moment. That can sometimes creep in. Oh, good, we can stop doing all those unnecessary projects and we can save some money. Well, actually, if they're unnecessary, we shouldn't be doing them. And by showing that we had that maturity, that we were already refining the portfolio, making sure we were spending the right money in line with the strategy, making sure those cornerstone pieces are in place, gives you that trust, and that puts you in that trusted advisor camp. The worst thing you can be is that administrative camp when they just fire questions saying, give me the data on A, give me the data on B, we're going to make decisions. That's not a good, mature program delivery office.
No.
So, you can say something else, Rupert, on that? Or?
I was, sorry, I'm pinching another minute. Sorry about that. So the only other thing I was going to say was that I think one of the things we need to do as portfolio officers and PMOs is we need to remember that the reason we're here, and not get too wrapped up in the textbook and the courses that we've been on. Because the reason we're here from the perspective of the executive team is pretty straightforward. It's around consistency. It's around prioritization of the portfolio. It is, but what it is, it's all about driving outcomes. And I think if PMOs and portfolio offices can focus completely on what are the outcomes that the activities that we're driving day to day, what are the outcomes they're delivering for both our business and for our leadership team? What's the value we're really generating? Then I think you become more of an outcome focused function than a function that's focused on the mechanics of raids and PIDs and portfolio reviews, etc., and align with the executive team's needs. Yeah. And I think the final point I'd make is that you have to remember, or we have to remember, that probably 8 out of 10 members of the executive team really don't care about methodology. They don't care about project and program. They tend to be quite JFDI. They're very attention span of a gnat. They're very successful in their own right because they're good at what they do, not because they're good at running programs. So you have to adapt around that culture, those characteristics, and feed them. You've got to align with the way they operate. If you give them detailed project plans and many of them are just going to switch off and not engage with what you're trying to deliver as an outcome.
Yeah. So one of the other questions that we had later on, it feels like we've answered some of it already. So I'm just going to ask you, just in case there's any more to add. And it was, how do you transform an administrative PMO function into a more proactive value add function? And when is it appropriate to do that? So I think we've already started answering it, but is there anything more that you'd want to add to that one?
Yeah, I think the key is that delivery. And it's showing that you've got the cadence of delivering, that you understand what actually adds value. We can all talk about milestones in delivery, which are the ones that are actually going to capture people's imagination, which ones are the ones that people want to repeat. And we often talk about this to engage with some of the senior stakeholders. Find something unusual about the change or the project that you're doing that enables them to be that person of expertise. So they can mention, oh, that really tricky situation in between Singapore and Malaysia. Right? Oh yeah, we need to make sure we've got that. They love being put into that position where they can be the expert, and then they can ask the question, then they can defer to the team. We've all got those projects which the title is, as long as what you're actually trying to do, try and be a bit punchier, try and actually put something to it. We're trying to do overseas regulation. Okay, that's a little bit easier than changing system number 7 with 14 different, we've all seen those. So you've got to try and make it really, really punchy. You've got to try and get across those key change moments. And in a regulatory environment, sometimes they are dull, but protecting the license, protecting income, making sure we can still write business, put some numbers to it, spend some time thinking about your change and comms, and actually think about it. If you were an independent contractor, not an in-house delivery partner, how would you be selling what you're doing for that company back to them? Because it's really easy to get lazy when you're an in-house department and not actually think about, how am I going to show these people that we are a good spend of money? Why shouldn't they reach for the tier 1 consultants? Why shouldn't they just outsource and use other companies to deliver this? Because guess what? They've got a bigger bench than we have. They'll have resources ready to go, drop of a hat. But where do we add that knowledge and value, and how do we make it personal to those stakeholders?
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you very much. Rupert?
So I think the way I often look at this particular sort of problem or challenge is, I run my own business. We are independent, and we have to go and get contracts that are in the world of delivering portfolios, delivering PMOs, and selling software. I know that, therefore, if I get a piece of work working for a company where we're providing the PMO, as an example, as a short-term assignment or whatever, I know that I have got to do certain things to win that piece of business, and I then have to do certain things to keep that business. And the primary thing I have to do is I have to deliver value. I have to be seen to be delivering value. And I think if you have a PMO or a portfolio office, you should think of it as your own business. You are a business within your company, and you've got to go and sell. You've got to pitch what it is that you have to offer to your own business. And then you've got to deliver on that, and you've got to deliver value. And if you do deliver value, as Joe says, you'll build credibility and trust, and that gives you a license to do all sorts of exciting things with the portfolio. I think, step one, when we go into an organization, we will go and we'll ask the business what they're looking for as a service. We'll ask the executive team, what is it that you want from this function? And, go out there and ask them the question. I think, sometimes the PMOs that we see and we work with sometimes actually determine what they think is the right thing to do. And then they go out there and they start doing it and waiting for a reaction. Don't go out there and ask what they want. Ask what's the service they're looking for. And then that generates some of the outcomes that you can then focus on, and you build as simple as possible solutions to deliver those outcomes so that the organization can cope with it. There is no point going out and buying tools and templates, including our own tools and templates, etc., that the business isn't going to be able to cope with. They just won't. It'll just break. It'll make you look stupid. It's bad for your credibility. And build a brand. Go and build a bit of a brand that you sell to the rest of the business. This is what our function is about. This is what we're here to deliver, and shout about your successes.
Thank you very much.
I agree with that. And that's where I think repeatability is so useful. So when we're an embedded function like mine, making sure things look consistent, making sure people see the same format, the same approach, the same documents, artifacts, those kind of things give people a level of comfort that things are being done properly, and they understand why. So they get into the cadence of, so I see this document, then this leads to this one, and then once a month I'll see an update.
Yeah.
I think getting that kind of change muscle exercised in an organization is really important, because that's where you can build up the strength and the trust to keep it going. And when the time gets tough, that's when those repeatable bits come in, because you can say, stick with it, this works, just stay on the journey with us. And that really does calm people down, because when change goes wrong, people get very knee-jerk reactionary. They start looking for a quick fix. And unfortunately, often that results in QA from third parties, tier one consultancies, and that just adds to price, puts the cost up for everyone, and actually adds a level of uncertainty that everyone then starts double checking their homework and really losing that kind of momentum that they've built, because they're suddenly worried about everything. Give a nice strong framework and actually work to it, and you're consistent, that can really help build.
I think you gave us a wink during that answer, Joe. I'm not sure if you were aware of that at the time, but it was not.
Well, I'm always good at that, happy.
A nice touch. We actually have a question from the audience as well, so I'm going to put this to you. So this is from Tom Saunders, and if it's the Tom I know, I hope the Spanish is coming along well. Tom, mine didn't get very far, I'm afraid. But he asks, Rupert strongly advocates evidence of value. What measures would you recognise or present as the value measures for an effective PMO? And it is the Tom I'm thinking of, so he just said K afterwards. So hello, Tom. So yeah, Rupert, over to you.
So I think there's a number of measures for me that would determine an effective PMO. The first one for me is, are we prioritising the right projects? Now, some of these are probably quite subjective because it's hard to necessarily build metrics around some of these points, but I think they're really important. So are we doing the right projects, for me, is number one question I would ask. And what I'm looking for there, if we're going in and we're doing a health check on a portfolio, is how has the money been assigned? On what basis have projects been prioritized? Are there members of the exec that shout loudest that manage to get their pet projects onto the portfolio? Have we got methodology almost driving prioritization? So we've got an agile program over here that makes it on there because it's an agile project. So that process of prioritization for me is a key metric. I think the other metrics are things like, so now assuming you're getting the right projects onto the portfolio, I'm then looking for some consistency with timings of going through specific gates if you've got a high level of maturity. And I'm also looking for the consistency of documentation and content that allows you to go through those gates. And I suppose ultimately I'm looking at the tolerance for ready for service and go live on different elements of a project or program across the portfolio. And I'd probably be measuring that by sponsor, as well as just by individual project or project manager, program manager, or whatever. But I would be looking to push some level of accountability onto the leadership of the business, as well as the delivery mechanism of the business, which I would do through some sort of some metrics around ready for service, stroke, delivery against dates, cost, benefit release. I would not put any metrics around benefit realization. We touched on this briefly yesterday. There's a big difference between benefit realization and benefit release. And for me, the portfolio office and the project delivery community is accountable for benefit release, not benefit realization. So, you know, you can put some metrics around the dates that benefit solutions that drive benefit release have been delivered, and your tolerances against those.
Yeah. So on that, I think that's a good reminder, Rupert. So for the people that are on this call today, but that weren't on yesterday's webinar, we talked a lot around that and also sponsorship. So if any of you would like to know more, just drop us a line and we can give you a link to the relevant video. Joe, was there anything you wanted to add on that subject?
Yeah, only a small piece. I think it's the macro level measures that you really need to look at within a program, within a project. Work with your sponsors, work out what it is they want to see at the kind of micro level. Coming up to the portfolio level, you've got to think about the big kind of ticket items. How much are we spending on change? Because you can turn that into a day rate pretty quickly. What's the resource that we're tasking to this? And where do they come from? Which ones are internal? Which ones are tier 1 consultancies? Which ones are flex delivery partners? Which ones are offshore partners? P&L benefits. I think you just mentioned it there, Rupert, and you kind of answered the question in advance of this one. Everyone gets so het up on benefits. They're lovely, but to actually find tangible benefits in a regulated environment, good luck. I mean, the Lloyd's portfolio, for anyone who knows Lloyd's, we don't write insurance. It's a wonderful thing. We don't have a profit and loss line. So how are we going to kind of make these savings? We have to justify our kind of reason for being a little bit differently. So we tend to look at things in terms of risk profiles, protection of business, operating costs. Where can we lower these things? But you're absolutely right around the realization. That's not down to the program team to get done. That's where people have got to sign up right at the very beginning that they are committing to making those changes that you've identified will help. So for me, it's the big high level kind of pieces of MI that you need to look at. And then when you get down to individual projects, spend time with your stakeholders, understanding what's going to be the bit that tips it over. Is it going to be spend? Is it going to be cadence? Is it going to be timeliness? There's different things for every project. At that high level, you need to know how much you're spending and where you're spending it.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask the next question, which I think could take us a while, and I think there's several component parts to it. So this was, how should a portfolio office be structured in order to react to external factors quickly and effectively? Again, Joe, I'm going to start with you on this one.
Thanks. So from my point of view, it's very simple. I mean, we all know there's different types of programs. And I think just calling that out, however you choose to identify them and label them in your organization, is something you can discuss internally. But very broadly, you're looking at run. What are we doing to run the business? How do we need to get projects done to keep us going there? What are we doing to protect the business? You know, how do we make sure we keep the licenses in other countries in our case? Or you may have other regulatory pieces that you need to look at. And then you've got your third kind of tranche, which is change and innovate. So when you're looking at that, that's really where you can play around. In the change and innovation space, you should be thinking about the prioritization and triaging more regularly. Protect, guess what? You're following a set series of recommendations that you have to go. The PRA might flex, or the Singapore regulator may flex a bit, but they're going to tell you what they expect to see happening. And in the run side of things, you know what your business is year in, year out. you have to get better at it. You have to look at what's coming down the roadmap. You know, we're coming to the end of life on this platform. Let's not wait till it breaks till we think, oh, probably should replace that. We know it's going to happen. So get your architecture right and and deal with it that way. But you should have a rough idea of how much you're spending on each part. Now, it differs per organization, it differs per year, but that's the conversation to have with your board. How much do you want to spend changing and innovating the business? If I take the Lloyd's example for the moment, we've got the future at Lloyd's. There was, and it's very public knowledge, so not sharing anything outside of confidences, we took 300 million to invest in the future at Lloyd's project. And we borrowed that money. We said, we're going to have control of that and we're going to go ahead and get that done. So we put a price on that change and innovate tag for the market. We're still doing the rest of our change to run the business, to protect the business, and to do internal innovation and change as well. So that's how we've structured it. We've got a market delivery vehicle and we've got our core portfolio. For about the next 2 years, we're going to be divergent. And then in 2 years' time, we're going to converge back in again. And we'll absorb those skills. Some people are saying, is it because they're doing agile with a big A and we're not? No, we're all doing different elements depending on the project. Some of our projects are digital internally, some are not. Regulatory ones tend not to lend themselves to agile. If I take one, for example, we're doing a data center move. We're actually shutting our data center at the moment. That's not an agile project. You don't sit there and go, oh, wonder which servers will shut down this week. You know, you plan that one out and you get it done in an ordered fashion. So you apply those tools in the right place. But you've got to have an idea of where you're spending that money. Future at Lloyd's is not going to be looking at how do they protect the Lloyd's business? How do they run the Lloyd's business? They are pretty much 100% allocated to innovation and change. Now that's incredibly powerful. That's a great way to set up a change portfolio. Keeping the rest of our portfolio broken into those 3 chunks as well means that I'm looking at about 15 to 20% of my portfolio in the change and innovate space. Probably about 50-50 then between the run and protect for the remainder of that portfolio as well. We do a lot of regulatory change. We do a lot of the roadmap pieces. We are the people sitting there as the change vehicle for Lloyd's going, yeah, do you remember 2 years ago we said we needed to replace this system? 2 years is up. Let's start working our way through the RFP. Let's get to the right negotiation point, work out the data, all the usual kind of things you'd expect. And that's where I think you can actually try and structure the portfolio to be a bit different. That helped us when COVID hit, as I mentioned earlier. The run and protect, yeah, we're going to carry on doing those because we're expecting the business to be here. We've been here 330 years. We'll carry on. We'll assume we've got another year in us yet. Change and innovate stuff. Well, actually, if we're taking a few punts and we're doing some things a little bit crazier, okay, that's the place to slow down and maybe actually bring them into the operational response team. And that's where we seconded people into that operational resilience team and turned it into a COVID-19 response force. Yeah. It worked really well for us.
Yeah, thank you. Rupert, what's your view on that?
So I think for me, base one, before you actually look at the organization structure of the function, is to connect with the culture and the capability of the organization. So I'm sure on the webinar today, there's people from all sorts of different sizes and levels of capability and maturity, but that are running portfolios. And what I mean by this is, this is a sort of a real example, and I won't mention names, obviously, but we got involved in a large organization that had a very low level of project delivery maturity and portfolio maturity some time ago. And what they actually did was they employed a tier 1 consultancy to come in and talk them through how they should run their portfolio. And it was a significant piece of work, and it came out with a target operating model for the PMO. That was part of the piece of work, but a target operating model for the PMO that took them from I think there were 2 people in the PMO at the time, very low maturity and capability, and their target operating model, which was being recommended to introduce almost immediately, included a range of business analysts, portfolio analysts, risk and issue management teams, etc. And when you looked at the rationale behind it, it was just so misaligned with the culture and the capability of the organization that you just knew that if they tried to implement what was sort of utopia, that's what had been outlined, was it was a long time to build a picture of a utopian environment for running a portfolio, but that completely forgot to connect with the existing culture and capability of the organization. So it was like shooting for the stars. And here we are 2 years later, and none of it got implemented because it wasn't possible. And I think so I think number one is just connecting with the culture and the capability of the organization, and allowing yourself to say, this, or the portfolio office is an evolution. We're going to go on a journey, and if we are at base 0 today, we can only go to base 1 as our first jump, but we need to define what that looks like. And so in many cases that might be as simple as just, we want to prioritize the right projects. I'm talking, this might be simple, but this is huge. Prioritize the right projects, give visibility and transparency of our roadmap and our portfolio to our executive team in a format that they can digest and that helps them lead more effectively. It might be simple things like that, but that step is a big step for the organization and in capability, but it's a manageable step. And you might go from 1 or 2 people up to 2 or 3 people, whatever it might be, but focusing on very specific outcomes. And then you move to the next step, and then to the next step. And it may be you have a stake in the ground for your target operating model, which is 2 or 3 years out, but you actually move in steps that are manageable by the organization. The next thing I would say, we tend to do is a bit like Joe was just outlining. We split the portfolio up into segments, and we tend to look at it in a fairly simple way because we're working across so many different customers. We have tier 1 programs, tier 2 programs, and tier 3, sometimes tier 4, depending on how big. But tier 3 tends to be more of your BAU sort of fairly small works. Tier 2 is a combination of must-dos, which is your regulatories, your compliance, etc., and some programs that are probably going to be sponsored by senior management, but maybe not up at the executive level. And then tier 1s are your real sort of biggest transformation programs. And often if you look at them in that pyramid, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, they tend to get bigger as you go down the pyramid. But the benefit realization or the benefit value is often at its biggest in that top tier. So you've got to get that bit right, and therefore you treat them and you build your organization in a way that essentially enables you to treat tier 1 slightly differently to tier 2 and differently to tier 3, but giving tier 1 the sort of attention and support that it needs to succeed. And an example of that is we run we have a framework called Boost Start, which is for mobilizing transformation, large transformation programs. Why do we call it Boost Start? Because call it a program definition package and people just switch off immediately. Whereas you go to an exec and you talk about acceleration or boosting or faster or dynamic, and they get, it's simple stuff, but they get drawn into it. But that can be a 12-week piece of work to define and mobilize a program to the extent where we know it's then in a position to succeed. And that's a very different level of attention that a tier 1 gets to a tier 2, which you might do a similar sort of exercise, because at the end of the day, it's a pretty Prince 2 checklist type activity. But on a tier 2 program, that might be half a day. It may be a much smaller exercise where you're captured. So you sort of build your operating model around your, where your primary focus is in order to focus in the right areas.
I think that points nicely back to the overall objective of this webinar, is how to gain control in the first place. And I think it's getting off to the right start from what you're saying, and investing in that upfront.
I think. Yeah, I mean, if you said in that first step from very low capability to step 1, if you just simply said, we're going to initiate our programs better, we're going to give more thought and more clarity to defining and mobilizing our projects and programs, it would make a big difference to delivery success.
Yeah. Okay.
And to answer that, Rupert, as well, I think as we've kind of moved through the maturity curve, we've now brought in the view of portfolios back in. Now, as many of you have done kind of change over the years, we have portfolios, then we centralize and we don't have a portfolio, then you have groupings again. They tend to move through the different maturity cycles. Ours is going through that bit at the moment to try and answer that upfront piece of, well, how big is this change? Where should it be done? What's its relative priority? And what we're trying to do is find those logical groupings. So say finance and regulatory reporting, they'll have one portfolio of change for the year. We've agreed that for 2021. That's their fund. If they want to do something new in there, they can actually reprioritize within that portfolio. So we've given them that control because we've actually been able to pull apart the portfolio, identify those tier 1, 2, and 3 that you've mentioned about. And it's where we focus the tier 1s is those are the ones that the exec want to see regular updates on. We all know those projects. Yeah. Not necessarily the biggest all the time. They're the ones that are, oh, my name's next to that one, what's happening with it? What that allows you to do, though, is to take 2/3 of the portfolio and get on with it without the distraction of constant oversight. It always reminds me of that moment in Star Wars where Han Solo is constantly tapping C-3PO on the shoulder saying, get on with it. He's trying to, but you keep distracting me. So by clearing the path there, that does help. And what we've done is that kind of boost segment, we put that back into the portfolio to let the managers there work with their stakeholders to stop them going off piste. Because the worst thing in the world that can happen in the portfolio is people turn up with a business case they've created on their own. Even worse if they turn up with a business case they've created on their own and had approved. So they've turned up with a bit of money and a rough outline and gone, right, can we deliver this? And of course, you know, the moment you look at it with your teams, you go, where's the testing? Where's the architecture? Where's X, Y, Z that's all missing? And you just pull your hair out a little bit because you go, we've got all this. We can help you do this. Why didn't you come to us first? And that brings it back around to that trust piece. To be an effective PMO, to scale and to get control of the portfolio, you've got to be the first point of contact for anything when they're thinking about change. Doesn't mean you have to do it all. You have to still set some guidelines. You know, don't start looking at projects but okay, for example. Otherwise, you'll be mired in small change for forever and a day. But if you can set those boundaries and get them coming to you in the first instance, or your portfolios, if you're separating them out and they have those trusted partners who have got the delivery cadence, who've got the trust because they've earned it, that starts to provide the control and the scalability of that portfolio. Yeah. So that you're absolutely right to point out the tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 thing. And I always view that tier 1 being what the exec really want to see. And like I say, it's not always related to space.
Yeah. Okay.
No, it's often related to fear.
Yeah.
Well, we had a flurry of questions in, so we've obviously hit a rich vein of interest from
this is good,
which is good. Yeah. So we've got another one from Tom. Initially, he says "Hola," so good Spanish skills there, Tom. Do Rupert or Joe have a view on the reasonable range of cost of an effective PMO, either as a ratio to portfolio size, capex, revex portfolio cost, number of and type of projects and programs, or by some other measure?
It's a really good question. Very hard to put a number on. I can speak from the Lloyd's point of view and how much we're going to spend regularly and how big a team we think we need. The real issue is to make sure that you don't overcommit. What you don't want is 100 to 150% of capacity as an internal capacity. The risk you carry then is just too big. Best practice will tell you should always be aiming for kind of 60 to 70% of project resources you should have in-house as a capacity. I tend to err a bit lower on the caution side there, and I aim for about 50%. Because that keeps you with a decent churn and enables you to change and get SMEs in when you need them. And I think often we're so worried about the cost of resource for things like tier 1 consultancies that we try everything we can to not bring them in without realizing that actually they're a good resource to use when you've got an SME type problem, when you've got those tricky, complex problems that require someone who's done it before who can do it in half the time. So I think you need to look at your resourcing mix first. Then you need to look at your total spend and work out, well, okay, if I've got a £20 million portfolio, I should probably be working at around about, I'd say around the 10% kind of region for costs for your internal resource. But that is a complete benchmark figure. You can take whatever you want. What you need to be looking at is how many people you're going to need for that change. And you want to aim for roughly 50% being internal people. I'm excluding SMEs. I'm talking about change people only in there. So analysts, PMOs, project managers, program managers, those kind of resource skill sets. And then you've got to get that right cost there. But make sure people don't kind of say, right, well, you've got 20 people internally. You won't ever need to reach for a tier 1 consultancy, will you? No, don't be silly. If there's Part 7 transfer is it's very close to my heart at the moment. Guess what? You need someone who's done a Part 7 transfer before. Most of the people in your team will probably never have even heard of one. So that's when you go outside and you buy the resource. So I think almost start with what should the mix be, how many people should it be, and then translate that to cost against your portfolio.
Just out of interest, Joe, where did you get your Part 7 transfer resource from?
2 different places. A lot of
One
it
of them was.
a lot of it was from just out of
that's a coincidence.
one of our partners, but then there was also some tier 1 consultancy.
Thanks very much. Rupert, have you got a view on that question?
Just very, very brief one, really. I'm going to slightly sort of chicken out and duck the question. It's slightly, because for me, it depends on how your PMO is structured. So some PMOs tend to have the delivery teams devolved out into the business units, so they're not part of the central PMO. Others have the project management community, etc., very much as part of that central team. What I would say is, I think if the project management community is devolved out into the business units and therefore isn't sitting on the cost base of the portfolio office, then my personal preference is to go for as lean as possible in the center, because as Joe has said, there is a massive, a huge characteristic with the PMO or the CPMO is trust and building trust. And actually you build that far better from a low cost base than you do from a higher cost base. So my preference would always be to start with a low cost base, really demonstrate value, and then allow that cost base to rise in relation to the value you're generating across the organization. I think if you're then including the delivery community, I personally feel that the right sort of balance is somewhere around 30% external to manage your flexi needs, somewhere in that region. When companies come to me like they did, I had a number of companies coming to me at the beginning of COVID-19 when it had hit, saying, right, all consultants out, all external contractors out. And some of them started saying, we're going to try and do everything internally, which really worried me, because I just don't think it's a good place to be for their businesses. They need that capability to flex. They also need the ability to buy in the expertise. And so for me, somewhere around 25, 30% external, maybe 20%, it just feels about right.
Okay, thank you. We've got another question here from Nick Denson. This is for you, Rupert, I think specifically. Can I ask about the tiers that you referenced? Does this create a situation where tier 3 stuff ends up not being delivered? And if so, is this something to be embraced or mitigated?
So it's a good question. Now, often the central PMOs or enterprise PMOs or whatever that we work with will only focus on tier 1s and tier 2s. That's quite often the case. It's not necessarily correct or right, but it is often the case. And then tier 3s are visible. They're visible to the executive. So on our piece of software, one of the things we've done is we've essentially enabled you to build in your tier 1s, your tier 2s, and your tier 3s, and often, or tier 4s. Often the tier 1s, as Joe said, they are massive sort of exec profile. There's the people in that level who are worried about them not delivering and who are wanting them to deliver, some combination of the two. When you get down to the tier 3s, it is generally happening within individual business units. It's local activities that still need to be visible. And often that is falling outside the CPMOs or the portfolio office's scope. Now, there's 2 arguments for that, because tier 3 projects, BAU projects, are taking capacity. They are using up resource, they're using up capacity, and therefore you could say, well, why the portfolio office should be driving into the tier 3s and forming part of the prioritization process to make sure we optimize our capacity versus demand. And but equally, you could say, let the business units get on with their own projects in their own way, their small works, we're going to concentrate all of our investment, all of our experience, all of our capability as the CPMO into tier 1 and tier 2, because that's where 80% of our benefits lie. That's where the primary focus is. And I would say more often than not, and I quite happily and readily endorse this with customers, tier 1 and tier 2 sits in scope for the CPMO, and tier 3 often sits out of scope.
Mm-hmm.
We're similar. We keep all in scope down to tier 3 as well. But I think Nick raises a good point. Tier 3 is the first on the chopping block. That's the reality of it, is that when there is severe cost cutting, they are the targets, right? What's in tier 3? How do we do it? But those severe instances are few and far between, and they tend to be quite catastrophic anyway. What it generally gives you in tier 3 is actually a real sense of freedom, because you can actually just crack on with it. So they're not the most important, which means they're not under the scrutiny, which means you can do things. And actually, identifying those tier 3s is really quite useful, because you can try something new. So while they are in catastrophic situations, the first on the chopping block, that is an absolute reality. If someone's tier 3 and there is an abysmal performance, or COVID has a wider impact than we think, they are the first ones to be said, right, can we stop those as well, please? You have to look at other measures in there, committed spend and things like that as well. But generally, tier 3 will be there. But on the whole, what we found is they tend to get left alone. It's actually tier 2 that tend to get tweaked with more, because people are aware of them, they can see them, and they're going, well, but in my opinion, it's a tier 1, so shouldn't we be pushing it? And you see a lot of people trying to push for it to be moved up or down, and it's always that relative priority order. Now, if you don't use the term relative priority regularly, I encourage you to start using it. And this is something you should try and create a straw man of, even if it's just your central PMO's opinion, to show people what the actual order is in number order. So I'm talking 1 through to 30 in terms of which one is the most important right now based on all of our factors. And it might be timeliness, might be risk, might be cost, might be burn rate. You've got to look at those, because the developers, the testers, the DBAs, the people actually doing the changes, they're the ones who are sitting there going, I've been asked by these 2 projects which one to get on with. And that's when you need to be able to say, look, these guys are relatively higher priority than these guys. Mm-hmm. Right, so you need to do that one. If you can help both, that's great. I'll give you the information. And guess what? When you trust and empower those resources, they tend to get both done anyway, but you've allowed them to say and manage their users' expectations. Sorry, project manager number 2, I've been told I've got to concentrate on this one, but I'm hoping to get to yours Thursday. And it just helps people take out the painful arguments and, what used to be, you can't do it anymore. It used to be people coming and sitting at the edge of people's desks. Any chance you can get my change done now? Well, I've told you already, I've got to get these 5 done. So leave me alone, then I've got more chance of getting it done. It just helps smooth the wheels there. So yes, tier 3 is on the chopping block, but actually they get a bit more freedom and they get a bit more self-control. And that's where you can look to experiment and try different things and try different changes to your own framework. Do you need all those artifacts? Or for a tier 3, could you drop out 50% of the artifacts and agree with audit that they're going to have a different profile? And that's where you can look to streamline and actually make those projects a little bit easier. Great as well if you've got junior project managers coming through and resources that is untested. Tier 3 projects are absolutely brilliant to try them on.
Okay, great. So just a bit close to time, I think we've got 2, maybe 3 minutes left. So there's a couple of more questions here, one of which, Tom, I'm going to park that for now, but maybe take it up with you separately, which just for the room is what are the best 3 portfolio management tools? So I think, Rupert, you and I maybe have a call with Tom and show him yours versus some others. And then Naomi Goldberg, very quickly before I ask my last question, is what do you mean by maturity? So just very quickly, if you wouldn't mind just clarifying what you mean by that, guys.
Sure. From my point of view, it's just where you are on the journey. So we all know you can be in different places. You could be, and Rupert's alluded to this, you could have a central PMO, you could have a distributed PMO or federated, whichever you prefer. But whatever model you've got, it's where you are on that maturity curve as you're going up. Now, to get to the top of the maturity curve, where you are absolutely the most efficient possible, everyone's bought into your methodologies, they're all reading your reports, making decisions off those, loving the MI, feeding back, that costs a lot of money to get to that maturity level. If you're down the other end, it means no one's looking at anything you're producing. You probably haven't got a tool and everyone's doing their best and going, I think I'm kind of delivering projects, but I don't do it the same way twice ever. Where you want to be is in the sweet spot in the middle, where you're doing the right level of kind of artifacts and production and framework and everything looks and feels roughly the same, but you're allowing your teams to experiment with that best practice. So they should be doing 80% of the core in that middle bit, and then they should be experimenting with about 20%. If you're going to go up to the 100% level, it's because you are so tied down in your delivery methodology that you cannot move 1 inch from it. That level of maturity takes a lot of money and a lot of backing from the board. It means they will literally stop programs because they're not filling in the right paperwork to get through a stage gate. You don't really want to be at either end. You want to be somewhere nicely in the middle.
Okay, thank you very much. So I just want to ask you the last question on my list, which potentially going to take us quite a long time, but it is I was going to say RICSID, that's an internal practice term which no one else understands. As quickly as you can, is what level of detail should you make available to stakeholders and how? Rupert.
So every stakeholder is different. They have different motivations, they have different fears. And in my opinion, and again, something that we've built our software to do is to enable you to adapt in order to deliver a very customized experience for stakeholders based on the things they want to know, the level of information they're interested in, and the things they worry about. And for me, generally as a rule of thumb, concise, visual, and engaging is important. It just is. That's, long texty reports just don't do the trick for most people. But equally, it's got to be easy to access. So it's got to be on their mobile phone or their tablet, or if you give them more than one click to get somewhere, they ain't going to go there. So simple, concise, visual, and tailored to their needs.
Okay, thank you, Joe.
Completely agree. And I think from my point of view, it's that one page, and wherever possible, make it self-service. People don't know the question they want to ask you, and they want to look intelligent when they ask you that question. By you drip feeding stuff, they feel a little bit like they're floundering. They have access to the raw data. They love it. And then they can come in and go, oh, could you tell me why in March 3 projects went red? Yeah, we can, really easily. So yeah, concise, quick, get the key messages across, but let them go and play with the data.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So Sunil, I've seen your question as well. We'll take that away and answer you directly. So just in the interest of time, and everyone's probably got other meetings to go on to, just want to say thank you both very much, Rupert and Joe, for joining today. Thanks for everyone who dialed in, particularly those who asked questions. I thought that was really interesting. So yeah, thanks very much. If you've got any other questions, please do let us know. We'll be very happy to help you. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thanks very much. All the very best.